Welcome to the And One podcast. I am your host, Alex West, and today I have a special guest, Corban Ford from the 94 Feet Report. We talk about the worst basketball GMs of all time, so it's a pretty enjoyable show. Get ready to give it a listen, and Brent, take us away. So I want to welcome my guest to the show today, Corban Ford. Corban, how are you, sir?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Man, we have had a time and a half just getting you on the show. It was a hour-long delay, but here you are, and we're excited to have you.
Yes, sir.
All right, man.
Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what you're working on, and before we jump into the topic of the day, which is bad GMs, which is always fun to talk about.
Oh, most definitely. Well, I'm a student here in history for University of Arizona, right with the 94 Feet Report, and so I just got a new laptop, trying to get started on putting out content in advance for the season.
Awesome.
Other than that, just school and staying up with the league. You know, it's news coming out every day, it seems.
It seems like there's no off season anymore. I mean, you used to be able to tune out from the last 2 weeks of July through the beginning of October, but now this season has just thrown that out the window.
Seriously, it's crazy. It went from, like you said, you had at least a couple of weeks off where you could sit back and, think about season previews and rumors and drama. It's like the NBA turned to a all-year, 24-hour league.
Yeah, there's no off season anymore. So let's jump into the NBA off season. Talk about that a little bit. Who do you feel like really got better this off season?
I've been singing the praises of Sam Presti for a while, and I took a big hit after the James Harden fallout, and after KD left, it was rough for me. But given the moves he made this offseason to bring in Paul George, and I think a sneaky pickup in Raymond Felton, I think he takes the cake on this one.
Okay, I mean, the Western Conference has obviously been improving all off season long, but adding a Paul George is a huge deal for Oklahoma City. Do you feel like they're going to jump into that? I mean, I've seen people say even as high as like second in the Western Conference. How high do you think this jumps Oklahoma
City? That's definitely a good question. I want to say third and fourth. I've learned, I'm sure you know, never to sleep on the Spurs. Even though I'm not a big fan of their offseason, I just don't like to mess with them. And the Rockets, to me, made a lot of big moves as far as competing with the Warriors, with those long defensive wing players and adding Chris Paul. So I have Oklahoma City penciled in this third.
Okay.
I think that they match up pretty well, but there's going to be a learning process, a curve, and I think that's going to hit them just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely and even like the bottom teams, Utah has improved, Utah hasn't improved, but Denver's improved, Minnesota's improved. That there are so many teams. Portland was in the playoffs last year, and Nurkic was hurt. So there are so many teams in the Western Conference that can just jump into the playoff picture, and it is going to be insane. Do you think anything that's happened this offseason has shifted the power structure? I mean, you got Golden State. They played the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals. The Spurs beat the Rockets. The Eastern Conference is Celtics, Cavs. Has anything really shifted? I mean, with all this movement, you would think the whole power structure has changed, but it kind of seems like maybe it hasn't.
I definitely agree. One thing I was pleasantly surprised to see is all of the action and the flurry within these front offices, in the sense that they could have said, okay, Golden State and Cleveland are going to own the NBA for the next 3 or 4 years. Let's wait them out, do the Boston Celtics trick of keeping assets for future years. And that didn't happen. Several teams went all in. Now, I think it makes this season a lot more interesting, particularly on the Western Conference side. But I still do think Golden State's a step ahead just because of the moves they also made. And in the East, it's like you said, Cleveland and Boston. Everyone from the East basically went to the West. So
yeah, I think
it's going to be a lot.
Nobody got better in the Eastern Conference outside of Boston, really. I mean, everybody got worse, and I'm not sure, except for Philadelphia. So maybe they jump into the number 4, number 5 seed. But
I definitely see that.
Milwaukee's going to get older. They're going to age a little bit and hopefully get Jabari Parker back. But there's just not a lot of change for me with all this action that seemingly would have reshaped the league. It just doesn't feel reshaped to me, which doesn't make it not exciting. It just is interesting to study it that way.
That is true. I actually had a question for you. What did you think, or what do you think about Boston in the East hierarchy? Obviously, they're right there with Cleveland, but do you think they're first with the move for Kyrie, or are they second? What do you see them as?
Oh, man, that's a good question. And I hate to say this. I'm sort of betraying my Celtics fandom here to say this, but I think that the team with LeBron is the best team in the East. And, it doesn't really matter beyond that. And whether they are the 1 seed, the 3 seed, the 2 seed, whatever, when it comes right down to it, LeBron is such a force of nature within the Eastern Conference because nobody can guard him. Nobody can do anything to him. And so adding Kyrie, awesome. And I think the Celtics can beat the Cavs. But if I had to put money on it, I wouldn't say that they are going to.
I definitely agree. That's kind of how I thought when the trade first went down. I was like, okay, who still has LeBron? Cleveland does. They're still the winners.
Yeah, and Boston needs jumps from guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. They need them to really come into their own as players, particularly Jaylen Brown, who's going to have to step up his responsibility of guarding LeBron. But I'm just not 100% sold that this is the finished product for the Celtics, which is something that will sort of develop over the next year. But adding Hayward, adding Irving, seems to me like there's one more step to put yourself into title contention.
I definitely agree. Having that extra piece or preying on the development quickly for these young ones on the Boston roster is a little much for me at this time. Maybe next year, grow into the role, get those minutes, get that playoff atmosphere, that experience. But it's a lot for this first year for sure.
Yeah, as a sidebar to that, the thing that probably interests me most this year is seeing how Kyrie Irving can develop because Brad Stevens is such an accomplished coach and he can turn players who are ball dominant into really fantastic complementary pieces off ball. And I heard this stat yesterday. I was listening to another podcast and somebody said that Kyrie Irving was a 42% three-point shooter from off ball, and nobody in the league is better than Brad Stevens at creating those off-ball situations. And so, to me, it's going to be very interesting to see that he might hit 30 points a game. It's not crazy to me.
I definitely agree. And like you said, Brad Stevens in the off-ball movement, we saw so many open shots by Isaiah Thomas when he was off the ball, just because of the way they're able to put down screens and pin downs and the way that Brad Stevens is able to open up the offense for his featured player. It's going to be interesting to see Kyrie in that role. I just hope that he's able to expand on his ball-dominant, high-scoring ways with the Gordon Hayward, with the Jaylen Brown, with these young players who also need shots. Well, Gordon Hayward's more established, but in the same vein of wanting to share the ball and be that floor general that Boston's going to need.
I think Kyrie's a better player than Isaiah Thomas, and I also think this is just adding to what you're saying, because I think that Kyrie having access to a guy like Hayward is going to create so much for him, because they do that advanced dribble thing. They did it a lot last year with Isaiah, where he would kick the ball into Al and then run straight to the basket, and Horford would send it right back to him. And those kinds of actions with two guys who can shoot, two guys who can create, and a third guy in Hayward just sort of puts this very difficult to guard offense on the floor. And I'm very, very excited as a basketball fan to see that kind of development.
I am as well. And I actually think it's going to be very interesting to see how they match up with the Warriors.
Yeah, because they had a great matchup last year, but this is a totally different team. I mean, it's just...
Exactly.
4 guys came back from last year. So it's like building an entirely new team. So I'm excited about that.
Definitely.
All right, let's dive into what we wanted to talk about. We're here to talk about some bad NBA GMs.
Woo, it's a lot of them too. Surprise me.
All right, so let's start with your list of your bad GMs. I made a list. I obviously didn't get as in-depth to it as you did, but let's hear your bad GMs.
I'm just pulling it up here to remember. I have Doc Rivers.
Okay.
Gar Pax.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Layden.
Okay.
And then 2 more. Billy King.
All right.
And for number 1, I had David Kahn.
All right, that's a pretty good list. Walk us through all these guys, and let's talk about why they're just terrible GMs. You want to start with Doc?
Okay, definitely. Doc, that was the easy one for me. First one on my mind, actually. As GM of the Clippers, just GM in general, I would think you have to leverage building a team for right now to compete right now with the roster that you have, as well as leveraging those assets that you have to use for the future. Is to make them stronger to compete. I don't think Doc did that in all his, I think, 4 or 5 years GM.
Yeah, most definitely.
First of all, I actually had a question for you just to kind of hammer this home. What was one competent small forward that the Clippers had during their whole Lob City run?
You stole my question that I was actually going to ask you. I was going to ask you, but who played the 3 for the Clippers at any point when Chris Paul was there that was even halfway competent? Like, you know who
during their run?
You want to know who the best name that jumps out at me? Like, this is no research, just off the top of my head. It's Grant Hill, who was 40 years old when he was playing small forward.
You know what's funny? I had forgotten that he even played there. Yes, I was still remembering them trying to resurrect Tidu Turkoglu and Steven Jackson.
Yeah, and they were just awful.
Oh my goodness! And not only were they past their prime, and that's putting it lightly, but also out of shape just for the basketball. When really at that stage of their career, they should have been more of a small ball 4, and even that is really stretching it. Oh goodness!
I mean, just to bring in Paul Pierce, and I love Paul Pierce. I can't wait till they raise his number to the rafters in Boston. I will always be a truth defender. But, oh my God, he was a corpse last year. And he played some relevant playoff minutes.
Exactly. And it kind of screams the way that Doc... it kind of puts home the way that Doc was as... that scene just finished being effective. I remember being a Lakers fan. We had Jordan Farmar in 2014. And he played well for us, surprisingly, because we were a horrible team. And he came in, gave us good minutes, started, came off the bench, shot a high percentage, everything. So the very next year, Doc picks him up to back up Chris Paul with the Clippers. Unfortunately, something got lost in translation between the play he had then and the play with the Clippers, and he flamed out very quickly.
I think, and I think you hit on a point there that I think you hit on a point there that even like further damns Doc as a GM is that he was always looking for a guy that someone else had developed. I mean, the Clippers never developed a guy. Like, the whole time he was there, they never had a rookie who was even contributing in terms of minutes.
Seriously, I agree. The only young player that, and you could say young relatively, he's not as young as I like to remember, but they traded for, that was Doc's son.
Yeah.
That was the only one that you could say, okay, was still early 20s. And even, I always looked at him as a low upside player. He's good, but I never thought, okay, that's a young asset you could put away. They had Eric Bledsoe. They traded him away for J.J. Redick, which was a good move, but then Jared Dudley, which I also thought was a solid move if they waited for him, but he was kind of going through his injuries then. So then he was not showing too much promise in that role, so they traded him away to Milwaukee, and he ends up playing strong with Milwaukee. And I'm looking at them later through the season, I'm like, wow, the way that Jared Dudley's playing, he would be great with the Clippers.
You guys could really use Jared Dudley.
Exactly.
And that, even the Austin Rivers trade is sort of baffling because they already had Austin Rivers, but better with Jamal Crawford. I mean, that's what he is. He's what I like to call a zero guard, a guy who can handle the ball, but also can create for himself and score. And that's what Crawford does. He just is a heat check guy.
Mm-hmm. No, most definitely. And you had him, and I wasn't a fan of the contract they gave him, the 3 years, 30-odd million. I have to look that up to remember, but he's 36, 37. When they had to resign him, and I know they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place last year, but the fiscal irresponsibility. I mean, signing Wesley Johnson to the contract they have him, bringing in Josh Smith after the great run he had against them, and then trading him. They signed him 2 months later, and then trade him back to Houston with cash to get rid of him. Just those type of moves.
Yeah, that is not a great track record for Doc. I mean, you have to feel like with your top 2 players being Blake Griffin, who you can sort of debate the highest level that he ever hit. But, I mean, he was probably a top 5 player 3 years ago in 2013, 14, 15 in that era. And then you had Chris Paul, who was probably the best point guard going for the past 5 years if you look at it all together, maybe with the exception of Steph Curry. But that's a team that, if you look at that top 2, should have been championship competitive for the entire window. And there really was only 1 year where they were.
Exactly. And that was just disappointing. When he first came in, and I don't want to put Doc down because he did many good things for LA, and he still is. He's still a coach, but he rallied them through that tough time that they were going through when he first took over with the ownership change and everything that went on with them.
Right.
He was able to build the Clippers. They were always competitive. It wasn't until the last 2 years that I looked at them and said, okay, they're not really the championship contender we all think that they are. And I think the media, we all by and large kind of said, okay, they're very competitive, they can make a run, but they weren't dark horses like they were the first 2 years. And I think if he had focused more on youth and on his assets and really stopped getting players who always played for him, Nate Robinson, Glenn Davis, and just try to manage that better, they would have been more effective.
Yeah, I don't know. It just is weird to me that someone who had such success as a coach couldn't assess talent to put on the floor in a way that was beneficial to the team.
I agree. And that was one. It looked, and when it first happened, I said, are we sure it's a good idea? For most of the signings that he made, just like you said, analyzing that talent and working with it, just, I don't know. That was a mystery with Doc, and hopefully this upcoming season he can focus back on coaching. I still think he's a very good coach. And see what he makes with this roster.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. All right, let's go on to the next one on your list. It was Gar Forman and John Paxson. And boy, do all the Bulls fans I know have a lot of opinions about Garpax.
Oh, my goodness. Going into, we can start with the Jimmy Butler trade that happened for a haul of young players who don't seem to be, aside from Zach LaVine, very promising. I mean, the verdict is still out on Chris Dunn, but I look at him as a player entering his 24-year-old season, not really a great shooter, had a horrible year, and I'm wondering, okay, I'm not sure where it's going to go. Trading McDermott and Taj Gibson for basically Cameron Payne, and then having him barely in the rotation come playoff time, now with another foot injury and basically word from the Bulls camp saying they knew he couldn't play. I don't understand it. There's a midst of horrible moves. We can even go back to 2000 with Jim Paxson, where he basically drafted Jamal Crawford, or he drafted him when he was with the Cavs and then traded him to the Bulls for Chris Minn.
Yeah.
and he was also responsible when he was with the Cavs for losing Carlos Boozer for basically nothing. And this is before he came to Chicago. And since then, they've been, I would say, the worst front office tandem in recent memory.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, setting aside for a moment, there was the injury to Derrick Rose, who was looking like a generational talent. He's 22 years old. He wins the MVP. So the injury to him obviously is going to set your franchise back. I mean, he was never the player after the injury in the 2013 playoffs, 2012 playoffs, where he got injured against Philadelphia. Okay, that's going to set your franchise back. So I'm willing to cut you a break on that one. But everything after that has just been weird and bad. I didn't like dumping Taj Gibson. I didn't like trading McDermott. I had hated the Jimmy Butler trade. Have stood on my soapbox ever since that trade happened and said how awful it was. I mean, it's just a series of unfortunate events.
Exactly, and I didn't even get started on the three alphas experiment. Oh my goodness.
Oh God.
And I had funnily enough talked myself into thinking, okay, this might be able to work. I've seen if Wade focuses on shooting the three and Rondo comes back and is humbled from his recent NBA voyage, and Jimmy Butler continues to develop and progress. Well, not develop, but progress as a main all-star. I thought, okay, I could see them not being great shooting, but being better than the media and everyone at large was marking them out to be. And at first, that Chicago game where Dwayne Wade was hot and he hit like 5 threes, I was like, okay, see, here it is. Jimmy Butler was playing well. They got the win. I said, all right, cool. And then after that, I think it just became a chemistry nightmare as expected, a poor shooting roster as expected. and an underwhelming team, as expected. It basically ended the way everyone said it would.
Yeah, and then they showed such promise against the Celtics in that first round series, going up 2-0. But you never want to put yourself in a position where an injury to Rajon Rondo knocks you out of the season. But people started talking about Rajon Rondo like he was a top 5 player in the league. Man, I don't know how they can do it without Rondo. Like
it was 2009 again or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. I mean, they're obviously I had dealings with Rondo, knowing as a Celtics fan. I mean, he is an enigma. He's got his own personality. He thinks about basketball his own way. But adding him, who he can't shoot very well at all. He's not a three-point shooter. He can't do anything off ball. And then adding, Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade to that just does not, to me, seem like a good team at all. And I don't know. I just never followed along with that.
Exactly. I definitely agree. And I'm actually curious to hear your list in a bit, but I'm tempted to put Dell Demps on that list as a late scratch, just because the Chicago Bulls took that risk with bringing him. Okay, let's bring him and another so-so guard and have them be our starting backcourt. And now New Orleans is going to do the exact same thing. Let's have him and so-so in the sense of Drew Holiday shooter, and let's make them our starting backcourt with a cramped front court. I don't understand it. I don't. The guard packs a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's not even. We will get into the Jimmy Butler thing momentarily, but
oh my goodness!
But still on this 3 alphas thing. Basically, in my head, there's this theory that in modern NBA basketball, you can play one guy who can't shoot, and if you play 2 guys who can't shoot, you start getting into floor spacing nightmares. It happened with a lot of teams. You saw it particularly in the playoffs, where defenses get a little bit tighter and people start to give a little bit more effort night to night. But when you put that team on the floor, you have 3 guys that can't shoot. So now, even if you play Mirotic or McDermott or whoever, Robin Lopez, who's a decent mid-range shooter. Exactly. But now you've got so many people who can't shoot that teams can just pack the lane on you and you can't do anything.
Exactly. And also Robin Lopez, as you said, even him, a great mid-range shooter, but that's more of in addition to his offensive talent, much less than you wouldn't consider him a shooting specialist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
He's not a floor spacer in that sense. He's like, okay, I can hit a mid-range jumper for you, let's say 3 times a game. But you can't rely on me for that. And that's what the Bulls did.
And in that same vein, if you use Robin Lopez as a mid-range shooter, now you don't have any offensive glass presence at all. Mm-hmm. Which, with that team, when they had Taj Gibson and Lopez, was a strength of the team, was here we can put a bunch of guys on glass because we have shooters and long rebounds. But if you're using a mid-range specialist, the rebounds aren't as long. So you have to have guys around the rim, which you don't have if you have Rondo, Butler, and Wade. The more you start to pull the threads on this tapestry, the more it just falls apart.
Seriously, exactly. And that, I think you just said, that's the guard packs in a nutshell. Just a loosely together string of ideas that fell apart. And we haven't even gone to the fact that to get Doug McDermott, and I forgot this until looking back on my notes right now, the Bulls traded 2 first-round picks to even get there.
Oh, man. Yep.
They traded the 16th and the 19th, and they traded that, and Denver turned that into Gary Harris and Yusef Nurkic.
Oh, my God.
You're not telling me that Yusef – exactly. You're not going to tell me those 2 couldn't help Chicago right now.
Oh, and then – okay, so let's jump forward to this year. Adding Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine, whatever. But you add the number 7 pick. And when you add the number 7 pick,
oh man,
when you come up, there's Dennis Smith. Now, think what you want to about Dennis Smith, but of all the players that were left on the board, I think Dennis Smith and Malik Monk at that moment had the most upside. You're not going to take Monk.
Oh, seriously?
You're not going to take Monk because you probably need someone to help him create. He's not a great off the dribble shooter. But there's Dennis Smith, this phenomenal athlete. Just take him.
Oh, yes. And Larry Markkinen.
Yeah, taking Larry Markkinen, who, I don't know, who's, I guess, the Finnish Dirk, or whatever they say. Sure, whatever. But, he can't rebound. He's a 7-footer. There's just so many things about him, and I have railed against this many times. But not taking Smith, and then And then I think an even worse move with Jordan Bell on the a guy who had a phenomenal phenomenal postseason run in the NCAA tournament, who really impressed scouts, who really looked great playing at the combine. And then they're like, we'd rather have $3.5 million than Jordan Bell. And they sold him to the Warriors.
Exactly. And if the Warriors want someone that you have, you seriously have to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm starting to put the Warriors on the Spurs list of, okay, Joffrey Laverne. Now, mind you, I don't think anyone thinks heavily of him, and I'm also in that group. But if the Spurs or the Warriors say, hey, we like a player you have to seriously consider, do I want to give that player up?
Not only
just on the sake of upside.
Not only do you want to give him up, I need every smart guy in this room right now to figure out why they want him. We have to figure out how to utilize this guy.
Exactly. And then I saw him in Summer League, and shot blocking, rim running big, who's going to be with the depth that the Warriors have. He's going to get some minutes. He's probably not going to be, starting to see with Chicago. But imagine if you had a player like that on your roster with this young developing team that's starting from scratch. And I wouldn't even say developing as of yet, because aside from Zach LaVine and Bobby Portis, I was impressed by him. Who do you think on their roster, giving a quick glance, has any significant upside? Larry Markkinen, I definitely like him.
I mean,
but
I'd throw Denzel Valentine on there, and I'm almost ready to write him off. I loved him at Michigan State. I love what he brings to the court. He's a high IQ player. It's just never materialized. But with a young team, maybe there's more of a chance for him to play. I mean, I'm not saying Denzel Valentine's an all-star, but I'm saying, given the right scenario, I could see Denzel Valentine developing into a quality player, which is something he has not been yet.
I get you. I can see why you'd say that. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely wrote him off only because I wasn't impressed in the limited time I saw him in Summer League. And as you said last season, just with the injury concerns and everything, I was like, okay, I expect a lot more from him. But you're right. With the role, with the minutes, he could be at least a decent rotation level player in the NBA.
Yeah, and so if you go back to even if they didn't even if they did the trade, you could go back and you could have Zach LaVine, Dennis Smith, Chris Dunn, who you're in or out about, but like Dennis Smith, Zach LaVine, and Jordan Bell is a much, much better three players to start to build on. And then with that team that has a lot of upside, you probably get another shot at the lottery this year, which they will with the teams they have. But it just, to me, seems like a very nice base to build from. And the base that they have now does not feel as good at all.
It really doesn't. It's shaky, to be sure. Looking at the roster, I only see one player, two, that could play small forward, and that's Paul Zipser and possibly Bobby Portis.
Oh,
unless you want to slide Denzel Valentine up. It's scary. Watching this team this year, I'm glad they're not on TNT. I truly believe in the TNT Bulls, and I would not want them to embarrass themselves on national television like they will.
I saw something crazy the other day that said that they might, with LaVine being out, that Zipser might have to play 2 early in the season, which...
Oh, God.
This team could win 8 games this year. I mean, it's awful.
You're right. The floor is so... I mean, the depths that they can sink, I don't even think know any bounds. I can...
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm saying if I was Gar Paxton, just because I said this, they probably won't do it, I would shop Robin Lopez around. Let's see if I can get a second-round pick. A lightly sought-after, I wouldn't even say asset, but a young player, Get rid of Dwayne Wade as fast as you can as far as buying him out, letting him work the court, especially with the chemistry issues that have been reported with the Bulls. Get him out, let him go on to greener pastures, and just start from the bottom, because this team's going to be horrible regardless. I mean, most players say, or most people say, okay, when you have a young team, you need to start bringing veterans in to kind of help them, teach them the right way to play. At this point in time, the Bulls are going to be so bad, you really might as well bring in young players, give them a load of minutes, and then start filtering out who you see being on the next great Bulls team, or even the next decent Bulls team, and then start taking the other ones and flipping them for older, more established players.
Yeah, I mean that's how you build a team. I think if I want to sum up Garpax in a nice little box, remember when Michael Jordan said that the ceiling is the roof? Well, this is the opposite situation. The floor is the ground for the Chicago Bulls this season.
I like it, and that is so true.
The floor is the ground, and hopefully Marvin Bagley reclassifies so he can be the number 1 pick last year. If you're a Bulls fan, that's what you're hoping for this year.
You seriously have to.
All right.
There's not much other than that.
Yeah, who was next on your list after Garpax?
I had Scott Layden.
Okay, give us the Scott Layden breakdown.
All right, so Scott Layden, I actually like the moves he's made with Tom Thibodeau up in the Minnesota front office. This is actually more of a history lesson. This is stuff he did from back with the Knicks in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
I'm from New York, so I remember some of this pretty well. I was very young, but he was hired in 1999, and they had just lost to the Spurs coming off the championship or the NBA Finals run they had there. And so he was expected to retool and help them transition from that era that had been so popular but had fell short in the 90s.
Okay.
And so he got started trading Patrick Ewing in 2000. And obviously, especially I remember with the New York fan base, we were not happy with that.
Great start. Always trading franchise players is always a great start to your tenure as a GM.
Exactly. Thank you. Really. And so he'd already put 14 years with us, 15 at the time. He was aging. He only played 2 more seasons. He was definitely over the hill. So I get that. But that's a fan favorite. That was the 1985 New York draft pick that we were all, not we because I wasn't around then, but people were definitely tied to emotionally. So that wasn't cool. However, not only they trade him away, but they got nothing back but Glenn Rice. And at the time, Glenn Rice, a great shooter, was injury prone, definitely going into his downside of his career. Luke Longley was a bench player from the Bulls. That's basically what he was known for. And had a moment with the Suns where he was still a bench player with them. And now that's one of the hauls that you get back for trading one of your prized big men.
And not only that, I mean, to add to it, you're talking about a 33-year-old Glenn Rice. Like, Glenn Rice, who was a fine player, great at Michigan, but is now 33. So you traded your franchise player, a guy who's universally loved within the city of New York. You got back Luke Longley, awesome, and you got back 33-year-old Glenn Rice. Like, fantastic. What a great haul for our franchise player.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you said that too, because I hadn't even thought of it like that. I was thinking, okay, obviously older, injury prone. That was my thing. I remember with the Lakers, he was always having problems with the bone chips that he was having in his elbows that had to be removed and
right.
everything. And basically, you trade him, he lasts 4 more years, period. And with the Knicks, he actually did okay. He made 25 starts. He averaged 14 points a game and 5 rebounds. He led the Knicks in scoring 9 times. But he ended up having plantar fasciitis, wasn't able to find a spot with the Knicks. They already had Latrell Sprewell and Allen Houston. And then after that, they lost in 5 games in the playoffs, and he was traded to the Rockets. So I really don't understand if you're going to trade someone like that and you think that Glenn Rice is going to put you over the top. The fact that you would think that is just sad in itself.
Yeah, and then not only did he do that, he went on to... Well, go ahead and tell us the next part of what Scott Layden did.
Oh, I was about to say 2001, Allen Houston. Love the guy. Great shooting guard for the Knicks. Was not worth $100 million. And that's exactly... I'm looking up the contract right now just to make sure I have all of that correct. But ties him up for $100 million in 2001, which... was basically $20 million yearly. That's almost, I don't want to say his salaries now, but for then, especially when he missed 32 games that year with a knee injury, and then was off injured the rest of his career.
And don't take anything away from Allen Houston. Allen Houston, great player at Tennessee, great player early in his career, 20-point scorer. The guy could play, but he was also 30, injury prone. And coming off some seasons where he had not been as productive in terms of efficiency as what he had been early in his career. So he was starting to show the signs of aging before this $100 million lock-in. And he would only go on to play, 3-4 more seasons after that? I mean, that was pretty much it.
Exactly. And the, like you said, as I said earlier, the fiscal irresponsibility of giving him that move. And then following that up, just to go on to the next year in 2002, trading away Marcus Camby, who was still a very productive big for the Knicks, and the 7th overall pick for a before washed up Antonio McDyess.
And Camby, who again, I don't know why I'm just reeling these off for you. Great at Massachusetts, and a guy who was coming on pretty strong. The 7th pick in that draft, not turning out to be super great. I mean, it was Nene, who's still in the league, but
True.
Amari Stoudemire and Caron Butler, both all-stars, going later in that draft.
Exactly. Imagine if the Knicks had Amari about 10 years before they did.
Yeah, boy, that's a very different situation. Scott Layden's track record, not super.
Nope, and that's led him, after that he flamed out. And right now, like I said, I like him with Tom Thibodeau. I mean, he got fired in 2004. The Knicks replaced him with Isaiah Thomas. That's a whole other story. I was actually going to put him on the list, but I figured that either A, we'll address it, or B, that's just too much of a softball. I was like, whoa.
Well, he's on my list.
Great. I'm glad.
Yeah, so we'll get there. All right, after Layden, after Scott Layden, who is on your list?
Billy King.
Billy King.
And oh, goodness. Trader Billy over here. And with him, I obviously, when you think of him, I think of at least the 2013 trade that crippled the Brooklyn Nets, that they're still paying for now, when they went to get KG and Paul Pierce. And mind you, at the time, I was a big fan of that move. I thought, okay, Brooklyn is, I didn't know the wheels had fallen off Garnett as hard as they had. He was aging, yes, 37, yes, but not quite there. And Paul Pierce actually played productively with them.
So here's the thing. I was also a fan of that, so that maybe should tell you what we thought about that trade on the Boston side. I was a big fan of that trade. Hated to see Pierce and Garnett go, but Garnett's production, particularly that year, had really, really fallen off. And maybe it was more of a culture trade. Like, you can argue that perhaps bringing in guys like Pierce and Garnett, who are championship caliber, who have pedigree as all-stars, would help Joe Johnson, would help Darren Williams focus and learn how to be champions. But
if only.
Didn't work out.
It didn't quite. And I actually wanted to run through. I have a list of most of his moves in chronological order, the key moves.
Right,
so
hit me with them.
In 2011, all right, I'll read that real quick. In order to get Darren Williams, Billy traded Derek Favors, Devin Harris, an unprotected first-round pick in 2011 that turned into Enes Kanter, and a first-round in 2013, which turned to Gorgui Dieng.
Oh, my God.
At the time, exactly. Looking at it now, it's like, whoa. But no one could fault him at the time of the trade because they were about to move to Brooklyn. They needed a superstar. Back at the time, Darren Williams was definitely that. They were desperate, and the Jazz got a pretty good haul of assets. I mean, Derek Favors is still with them. Devin Harris had a good year with them. Enes Kanter was there for a cup of coffee or two before getting run out.
Right.
It worked out.
Yeah.
And so, but then we go on to 2012. So, Billy traded Sean Williams, Mehmet Okur, and one lightly protected first-round pick, which we all know turned into Damian Lillard, for Gerald Wallace.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And that was yikes at the time, because at the time I said, okay, Joe Wallace is good. I definitely thought he was a solid player. I did not think that he was a superstar, which is, it turns out he was one of the moves that apparently convinced Darren Williams to stay happy, which Darren Williams either one of the worst player personnel analysts we've seen, or I don't know what to say, because at the time Joe Wallace was already entering his age 30 season, only played for 3 more years before being out of the NBA, and it wasn't really that impactful of a player in Brooklyn. And then right after they trade for him, because he wasn't on an expiring contract, they signed him to a $40 million extension.
Yep.
Which was arguably the worst at the time.
Uh-huh.
And he averaged 7.7 points and 4.6 rebounds before being traded to the Celtics.
And he finished out his career as a fixture on the Celtics bench. He was the living embodiment of that trade to Celtics fans. Was that we knew that because of Gerald Wallace, we had 3 first-round picks coming our way.
Exactly. Seriously. And that right there, it's wow. And then that same year, in order to get Joe Johnson, which, again, I thought was cool, but that contract that he had was horrible. But moving on into that, they traded the expiring contracts of Anthony Morrow, Jordan Farmar, Johan Petro, Sean Williams, and Deshaun Stevenson. They traded Houston's first rounder in 2013. That turned to Shane Larkin. They traded Brooklyn's second rounder in 2017. And they traded Atlanta's right to swap first rounders in 2014 and 2015. And that basically turned to Kelly Oubre for Chris McCullough. Which, all that for just Joe Johnson.
That one I'm actually okay with. I kind of like that move. Because, yeah, I mean, you gave up Kelly Oubre, but it just seems like it was a lot of filler pieces for a guy, Joe Johnson, who, was a great ISO scorer, who was all these things, and that could have worked better, but I still feel like I like that move. Of all the moves that have been terrible, I feel like I kind of like that one.
Okay, I can definitely get that. For me, it wasn't a good look for me, only because at the time I said, wow, his contract was one of, I don't want to say the worst. It ended up being that it was huge. I said, okay, I get that he's still a very productive player.
Okay, that's what I was not taking into account. But good thinking.
Yeah, and also I always looked at Joe Johnson as a second banana in the sense that even in Atlanta, he was a great player, led them to a lot of success, but he had Josh Smith, he had Al Horford. And so now you bring him on to Brooklyn, we're great, but you're teaming up with Darren Williams, who also, I never looked at as he was the best player in Utah, but I never saw him in order to get over the hump as he needed to play with someone better than him.
Right. And
so I felt that they had Joe Johnson miscast in that role. But even looking back on it now, 3 seasons later, they bought him out. During his tenure there, they won exactly one playoff series. I mean, it just turned out bad. I mean, those contracts weren't going to do anything better, but you do have that flexibility that you would have had you kept the picks, had you let those contracts go, and take your chances in free agency. I'm of course, hindsight being 2020, it's easy to go and pick that trade apart. But at the time, I just thought, okay, I'm not sure if this is the move that Brooklyn could have made. I would have probably focused more on trying to get Dwight Howard, even if that in its own way would have been a mess,
Right, yeah. No, I get it, because it's easier. It's the the old Danny Ainge philosophy of it's easier to trade 3/4 than it is to trade $1. It's very hard to trade that big contract. So if you can break it off into smaller pieces, it's much easier to make a deal. So that makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I always think about it now because I play 2K a lot. I live by 2K. And so once in a while I'll pop back 2012 or 2K13 of the NBA 2K and start playing with the Nets and say, okay, how can I get rid of that contract?
Yeah.
And I look back and I always laugh and go, wow, Billy King, you are one of a kind.
Yep, and crippled the franchise to this day. They're still recovering from it. I mean, obviously, picks that turned into, let's see, Jaylen Brown. This year was number 1, so that was his name is escaping me. Oh, Markelle Fultz.
I was about to say, yeah.
And then now one more potential high pick. I mean, maybe lower, maybe higher. But boy, you feel like a team with Jaylen Brown and Markelle Fultz would be a lot more competitive than what the Nets are right now.
Exactly. And I'm just gonna run past this last trade. We already went over it, but this Paul Pierce trade, and then basically I have a list of the players that Billy King received from those moves back in 2012, and all the notables that he lost. So in 2013 July, he traded Gerald Wallace, Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, Atlanta's first-round pick in 2014, which turned to James Young. It's not that big a deal.
Not a big deal.
Exactly. And unprotected first-rounders, this is the killer right here, in 2016, 2018, and Boston's right to swap first-rounders in 2017.
Oof.
And that was just saying it. It's crazy. And that was for Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry. And as you said, I liked the trade. I said, wow, Jason Terry's going to be that sneaky bench player who gives him some shooting, some experience, some championship pedigree off the bench. KG could still knock down that mid-range J, not realizing that he would rarely take it in Brooklyn.
Or not realizing that he had been dead for like a year at that point.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. And then Paul Pierce, who, like I said, played well, but to give up all of that. Mind you, Chris Humphries, okay, his contract wasn't great. That was nice. Gerald Wallace, we already talked about him. Marshawn Brooks, I liked. Looking now, obviously, it didn't work out too well, but I thought, okay, that's a nice little piece for them to have. All of those picks, though, man.
Oh, that's
it seems so long ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really, obviously, Celtics reaping the benefits, landing Kyrie Irving as a result of that trade. I mean, if you look at the growth of the decline of the Nets franchise and the rise of the Celtics franchise because of that one thing, boy, it is hard to say. I mean, you can say what's the worst trade of all time, and maybe you say Herschel Walker to the Vikings, obviously being number one. But
bias, yeah.
But like the Harden move, and then this move that when we start to look at it 10 years from now, if Fultz is an all-star, if Brown is an all-star, if Marvin Bagley is a franchise player, wherever these picks end up, you can just turn back and go, what the hell just happened?
I definitely agree. And hindsight being 2020, looking back on it all, even then, we all thought, okay, picks down the line. Who could really see what happens there? No one thought Brooklyn was going to be that bad. I thought, okay, especially having watched the way that they beat Miami all 4 times that regular season.
Right.
And some were definitely squeakers, but I said, okay, I could see how this could work.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, Deron Williams has the edge over Mario Chalmers, and KG has the better of one of the big men not being Chris Bosh on the Heat. Paul Pierce can still play LeBron to a reasonable draw. Dito for Joe Johnson and Dwayne Wade. I worked it in my head, and I said, okay, this could work. And then when they got Andre Karolinko and built their bench up a little bit, Andre Blatch had a good season that year. I said, okay, this is great. But then they got dispatched so easily when the Miami Heat said, okay, time to really just put you guys away.
Yeah.
And after that, Pierce, they didn't want to re-sign Pierce. KG stays a season and a half, too much longer than he should have. And here we are now. They just got progressively worse and worse. And I like the direction they're going to, but as you stated, that was pretty much the decline of the Brooklyn Nets as we knew them, and the rise of the Celtics to this perennial pseudo-contender, I want to say.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I don't see them being the Warriors.
No, that's fair.
And also building for the future.
Yeah, and I was going to say, even all these pieces have turned into something that, because the Celtics flipped the pick this year and ended up with another asset in that Sacramento LA pick that will be conveyed either next year or the year after. They got Kyrie Irving. Mm-hmm. These are moves, and trying to set aside my Celtic fan bias, but these are moves that let you build a team by taking chances on good players and young players, as opposed to building through trades, building through these other things. Like you're building through the draft, you're creating a culture, and it just seemed like the Nets under Billy King adopted the opposite philosophy, that they were going to go get guys who were developed and try to make them into a team in Brooklyn, as opposed to developing their own guys.
Exactly, and as it says, all the plays they received during that time: Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, Gerald Wallace, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry. And the ones they lost: Derek Favors, Devin Harris, Anthony Morrow, not much, Enes Kanter, Gorgie Jang, Draymond Green, Damian Lillard, James Young, not much, Kelly Oubre, Markelle Fultz, and more to be determined.
Oh, man.
And that's what's funny. And what's interesting about Billy King's deals, his deals were horrible. There's no really denying it. There's some that you can go, okay, I could see what he was thinking. But there's no denying them. However, his draft picks afterwards, I don't really see an issue with. He took Mason Plumlee, who made first-team All-Rookie after being taken number 22. Bojan Bogdanovic made second-team after being taken number 31.
That's not bad.
Rondae Hollis-Jefferson seems to be okay. Chris McCullough was decent. I mean, those picks right there, and if you take those and put them in a vacuum for how late he was picking, because he had given away his prized assets, but for how late he was picking in the first round from the deals he made to rectify his previous errors, it wasn't that bad a deal.
Yeah, the draft's definitely good, but when you hear that list of names that includes Draymond Green, that includes Damian Lillard,
yes.
Oh god, that is
yes.
All right,
oh my goodness.
Before we go to the number one, your number one guy, who I know it is, I'm going to give you my list, just a quick hitter here. My list in no. I wanted to hear your list because you have researched it, you've done the work. My list, I just put it together quickly, is in no order: Billy King, Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan, Elgin Baylor, and David Kahn.
Oh yeah,
that is my list.
Oh, wow. You got to remind these guys about Michael Jordan because...
Well, basically, when it comes down to Michael Jordan as GM, you can talk about one single thing, and that is Kwame Brown. That a young Wizards team with an aging Michael Jordan, obviously, but have a chance to add a quality player in the 2001 draft. They picked Kwame Brown, who was kind of an NBA player. Like you said, he had a cup of coffee in the league. But behind him, there was Tyson Chandler, Paul Gasol, Shane Battier, even Jason Richardson, Joe Johnson, Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Tony Parker, Gilbert Arenas, Mehmet Okur.
Oh, wow.
Like the 2001 draft, pretty stacked. And the Washington Wizards walked away with Kwame Brown. And to me, that's pretty much a killer for a guy who is, you can argue is the greatest of all time. I probably would as a player, but boy, what a terrible, terrible thing as a GM. So that's how MJ made my list. Elgin Baylor, longtime GM of the Clippers, showed his, I guess the mediocrity probably be the best word. Just the Clippers just languishing in mediocrity for 20 years under Elgin Baylor. Isaiah Thomas, GM of the Knicks. Unmitigated disaster in a line of unmitigated disasters. Billy King, which we talked about, and now we'll get to number one on your list, which is David Kahn. So give us the David Kahn right now.
All right. So I think David Kahn, the story of that right there can be summed up in one report that came out a few years ago. They basically claimed that David Kahn thought that Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn playing together in the same backcourt reminded him of Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe. As soon as I heard that, I said, classic Kahn. And seriously, listening to him, he's written a piece for Sports Illustrated about a month ago where he said that he was talking about basically comparing how Lonzo Ball didn't want to work out with the Celtics to how Steph Curry didn't want to work out with the Timberwolves. He didn't want to be drafted by them. He had his agent tell them, hey, no, I really don't want to go there. Which, looking back on that now, I understand. But being a GM and seeing the talent that he had then, now mind you, people were not sure if he was a combo guard, a small shooting guard. I mean, no one, I don't think anyone can say. Some say he was going to be a great player, but to see the living legend that he is now. But without even looking at that and saying, okay, me personally would have just drafted Steph Curry. Johnny Flynn at the time, and even now, great guy from what I hear. By all accounts, a good leader in the locker room when he played, had a great career in college in Syracuse, a good guy. As a player, you bring him in, not the best of shooters, kind of undersized. Obviously, that hip injury that he had ran him out the league, unfortunately.
Right.
You have him in, you say, okay, we're going to play an up-tempo style. We're going to also draft Ricky Rubio. And for the sake of time, not even going into the drafting there, where he took Ricky Rubio, great choice. But you take Johnny Flynn when Steph Curry was available, Brandon Jennings is available, Ty Lawson, who you later drafted and then traded to Denver, was available, and Drew Holiday. Oof. I mean, I would have even taken Jordan Hill over Johnny Flynn.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it, and obviously you say the two names that jump off there. They drafted Rubio, fine player, not a problem. They drafted Johnny Flynn with the next three guys off the board, Steph Curry, Jordan Hill, DeMar DeRozan. And boy, does that just start to look bad.
Seriously, it really does. And the drafting was definitely one of the worst parts, because then in 2010, he goes and gets Wesley Johnson, which at the time was, he played with the Lakers. I'm kind of partial to him. He's riding away on the Clippers now. I did not see that working out. I looked at him almost the same way I look at Chris Dunn now, in the sense that, okay, he was good in college. He wasn't great. He wasn't horrible. He was good in college.
Right.
But he's already played the majority of his career in college. He's 23, going on 24. He's later in years as far as development. And in terms of Wesley Johnson, you never really saw that much development. But not only in this fact that you took him with that pick, but you had DeMarcus Cousins and Paul George right behind them. And those two, David Kahn said, DeMarcus, we were worried about his attitude, this, that, and the other. And obviously that was a deal, but the talent level on him, come on. And Paul George, I mean, that's like up to individual scouting, but he made some excuse about how the scouting then wasn't advanced, and he had just gotten there a year ago, and they were still working on scouting players. But even if you buy that excuse, there was other lesser players that were taken around the same time that performed better than Johnson then and now, including Greg Monroe and Al-Farouq Aminu. I mean, and don't even get me started on manna from heaven, 4 years, $28 million to Darko Milicic.
Who didn't want to play basketball anymore, by the way.
Thank you. And apparently, David Kahn was swayed by an assistant coach, including Bill Laimbeer, who said that if he put it all together, he could be a top 5 big man in the league.
Oh.
And this was in 2010. This wasn't in 2003 when he was first drafted. This was in 2010. I really don't know what to say.
So I was just, while you were talking, just listening, going through this, and I started to put together a list. I just wrote it down. That if you go into the 2009, 2010, 2011 drafts, and obviously this is hindsight, it's just hard to say, but you could have fielded a starting 5 of Steph Curry, DeMar DeRozan, Kawhi Leonard from the 2011 draft, Kevin Love, and DeMarcus Cousins. Now, even if you hit 2 of those correctly, you're still looking at 2. I mean, say you hit on Steph Curry, you decide you're going to take a shot at him because he's a small college guy, but you think he can shoot, and then you grab Kawhi Leonard at 15, because he's a quality player out of another small school. Then you have Steph Curry, Kawhi Leonard, and Kevin Love. Or you've got DeMarcus Cousins, or you've got DeMar DeRozan. I mean, if you hit on 2 of those, you're a perennial all-star. I mean, a perennial favorite in the West. And, boy, did they not hit on any of them. Hit on exactly 0.
Seriously, and that in itself, and listening to David Kahn, you wonder, as most of these bad GMs, you wonder what universe they're on. Okay, I'm not an NBA front office executive. I have no job or any feature in the NBA. I'm just a very interested total fan.
Okay, right.
So, but I know enough to go, okay, that may not be a good move. This guy may have more potential. You can always think that. But when you look at just how big the difference was between, let's say, a Wesley Johnson and a DeMarcus Cousins.
Oh, man.
Or saying, exactly. Or even, I want to clarify, I said that they re-signed Darko Milicic for 4 years, $28 million. It was 4 years, $20 million. It was still about $20 million more than they should have given Darko.
He wasn't worth $20 at that point, much less $20 million.
Exactly. And then we also forget that he traded down. It seems like he traded down in all the drafts that he was involved in about 2,000 times. And he somehow lost the best international prospect that he could have gotten, who was available, and that was Nikola Mirotic, and used a late second on a 26-year-old who was ineligible for the draft due to him being 26 years old. And the fact that didn't even fit that out. I mean, are you serious? Thinking that Kurt Rambis, who loved him as a Laker, but that was about it, could be a coach for you to win a championship. He gave himself a 4-year window to win a championship, and he got fired exactly. He was in charge from May 2009 through May 2013, and he said, we have a chance to be a championship contender as you make the moves that you do.
Jeez.
I mean, and I'm partial. For example, I love me some Michael Beasley. I always have. I thought that if he's not going to put it all together. But I thought that when they first rolled the dice on him in 2010,
right,
I thought that was a good move. I said, okay, you bring someone in, much like I see Tim Hardaway Jr. with the Knicks, where he's a gunner, but you give him a team that basically is for him. So he's their main guy. You maybe slot some pieces around him, make him into I don't even want to say it's because disrespectful to Reggie Miller, but a Reggie Miller type player in that, yes, he's the gunner and he has a ton of flaws in the sense of being a rebounder, defender, passer, but he can put
right.
I mean, he ended up having to trade Wesley Johnson with 2 second-round picks to get rid of him.
Oh.
It's just these kind of moves basically made me put David Kahn first. And I'm sure you have, but if you ever listen, just put David Kahn on YouTube and listen to him with Chris Webber during the Summer League of 2010,
okay,
or 2011, when he was trying to explain away how Darko was the future. and he was likening Darko's career to Chris Webb. Reaction. Chris Webb was like, "Please, don't put me and Milicic in the same sentence."
I mean, if you look at any one draft if you just take 09, 10, and 11, and you look at any one draft, you see a list of David Kahn failures that would put him in the top 5 probably just on that one draft. But to make that mistake in 3 consecutive drafts, to miss on a ton of All-Stars. I mean, listen, they took Derek Williams in the 2011 draft with the number 2 overall pick. Derek Williams looked like a great player. I mean, he was sophomore coming out of Arizona, high upside, athletic. Even if you let that one slide and know that in that same draft that Kemba Walker, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard is a little bit of revisionist history because you kind of knew what he was coming out of San Diego State, and he developed into so much more. But
I don't think anyone thought about the development and how great he's improved year over year. You know, what I mean?
Right. But you still had Kemba Walker, who played fantastically well at UConn that year. You had Klay Thompson at Washington State. Like, there were guys that people knew were going to be quality players. And so you miss on that one. You miss on Steph Curry. You miss on DeMarcus Cousins. And that track record just starts to look worse and worse and worse. And I have to agree with you. You know, initially when I came into this, I was going to argue for Billy King, who has basically sunk the Nets franchise for a decade. But now that you have presented the case for David Kahn, I kind of have to agree with you. When you start to look at it, there's just a preponderance of evidence that he might be the worst GM in professional sports history.
See, I thank you, because I tell you, you could definitely make a case for Billy King, but just looking at it, and even now, there's so many. The more I talk to you about it, the more I think of moves that he made, not giving Kevin Love that extra year in that extension, giving him the opt-out when he wanted to commit all 5 years. And the reason why he said that is because the Russell West
the
same way. So he thought, exactly, you have a franchise player potentially who wants to be there the full 5 years, and you give him an opt-out, and partially the reason why he's in Cleveland now, when you could have built around him with oh man, the more I talk about it, I'm telling you, Alex, it's crazy. The more I think about it, the more I go, yeah, Khan.
Exactly. That clip of Captain Kirk in The Wrath of Khan where he just screams it. That's what you have to think of. Corbin, thanks for coming on the show, man. You want to get a plug in for what you're working on, what you're doing in the upcoming weeks and months for 94 Feet?
Hey, I appreciate it, man. I'm actually working on an article right now. I've been trying to piece it together and compose my thoughts, but a retrospective on David Kahn and the moves that he made.
Well, I can't wait to read that.
I appreciate it. Just really tying it together on why we cannot forget the long-term ramifications of the moves he made back then. I really feel he slept on as one of the worst executives in the modern era, basketball or otherwise.
You've got me convinced because, man, I didn't think it when I came in, and I kept an open mind, and you've just completely swayed me over to your side. So I can't wait to read your piece because I'm sure you're going to sway some other people over.
I definitely appreciate it, man. I'm working on that now, so hopefully I'll be getting that together. I want to say in the upcoming week. I'm just trying to find room in the schedule. You know how that goes.
Most definitely do I know how that goes. He is at Corban Ford NBA on Twitter. Make sure to give him a follow. Make sure to read everything he's putting together for 94 Feet Report. I'm sure had a great time with you, so I'm sure I'm going to have you back on the podcast during the regular season. Whenever you want to come back, you're more than welcome to. Thanks, Corbin.
Hey, I appreciate it. I had a blast, man. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
All right, definitely. You have a good one. All right.
All right, guys. Well, that is it for today. Special thanks to my guest, Cord, for coming on. Make sure you're following him on Twitter. His handle is Corban Ford NBA. My handle is @Alex_West. The show's is @And1 Analytics. Tons of Twitter handles for you to follow. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on SoundCloud, on YouTube, on iTunes, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. We're going to be back to regular schedule, bi-weekly, sometimes a little bit more, but leading up to the regular season and the preseason, we're going to talk about all kinds of things. So thank you. Make sure you stay tuned in. And until next time, for the And1 Podcast, I'm your host, Alex West. Good night.